The morning sun hit the trimmed lawns of Elmcrest Drive like a spotlight, and from her favorite wingback chair by the bay window, Martha Greenwell watched it all. She knew the rhythm of the street by heart. 7:15, the Roberts garage door groaning open. 7:30, the paperboy's bike whizzing past, the thump of the newspaper on each stoop a steady drumbeat. By 8, the street was quiet again, just the way she liked it. Neat, predictable. Proper dot, it was a Tuesday when the rhythm broke. A moving van, sleek and unfamiliar, blocked the cul-de-sac. Martha's tea went cold in her hand. The house at the very end, the modern one with the too many windows, had been empty for months. She'd been hoping for a nice retired couple, maybe someone from the accounting firm where her late husband had been a partner. But the person who stepped out of the sedan behind the van was not retired. She was a young woman, and she was black. Martha felt a familiar prickling at the back of her neck. It wasn't anger, she told herself. It was concern, responsibility. This was a good street, a safe street. You had to be careful. You had to vet things over the next few days, Martha vetted. The woman, she learned from a discreet call to the realtor's office, whose sign had now been taken down, was named Amina Johnson. Single. Bought the house outright with a cash offer. Martha's eyebrows nearly touched her hairline. Cash at her age? The observations began piling up in Martha's mind, each one a small stone of suspicion. Amina drove a plain gray sedan. No bumper stickers, no personality. She came and went at irregular hours, sometimes early, sometimes late into the evening. She didn't garden. She didn't cut out decorations. The blinds on her many windows were almost always shut, but the worst thing to Martha was the visitors. Not friends, surely. They were all sorts men in crisp suits, a younger woman with a severe ponytail and a laptop bag, even an older gentleman who drove a car with diplomatic plates, which Martha only recognized because her husband had once done some work for an embassy. They would arrive, stay for 20 minutes or an hour, and leave. No laughter floated from the house. No smell of a meal being shared. It was all business. Cold, secretive business. It feels transactional, Martha confided to her friend Barbara over the phone. Barbara lived 2 streets over and was the only one who truly appreciated Martha's vigilance. Who has that many meetings at home? At 7 in the evening? At 9 in the morning? It's not normal. Maybe she's a therapist, Barbara offered weakly. Without a proper sign? Without a waiting room? In that tucked-away house? Martha scoffed. No, it's something else. The idea formed slowly, built from a lifetime of watching crime dramas and reading the alarming snippets Barbara shared online. It had to be something illicit, something that required privacy and a steady stream of clients. The word hung in Martha's mind, ugly and definite. It couldn't be anything else. The neighborhood, her husband's legacy, was being threatened. She decided action was needed. A direct approach. A show of neighborly force. She would organize a welcome committee. It would be friendly, but it would also be a reconnaissance mission. She recruited Barbara and poor, nervous Linda from next door, who always agreed with Martha because it was easier. On Thursday afternoon, the 3 women marched down the sidewalk, a pastel-colored battalion. Martha carried a wicker basket filled with homemade lemon marmalade, a printed list of the Homeowners Association bylaws, which she had highlighted in yellow for important items like trash can placement and holiday light duration, and a smile that felt tight around the edges. Amina answered the door on the second knock. She was dressed in simple, dark jeans and a cream-colored sweater. She was beautiful, Martha noted with a pang, with a calm, watchful face. "Hello," Amina said. Her voice was low and clear. "Welcome to Elmcrest," Martha chirped, holding out the basket. "We're your neighbors." I'm Martha. This is Barbara and Linda. We just wanted to say hello and bring you a few things to get you settled. Amina took the basket. Thank you. That's very kind. She didn't invite them in. She stood in the doorway, a polite but firm barrier that an awkward silence settled. Barbara nudged Martha. So, Martha pressed on, her eyes trying to peek past Amina's shoulder into the shadowy hallway. What brings you to our little community? We're all so curious. Amina's gaze met Martha's. Her eyes were a warm brown, but there was a coolness in them, a distance. I needed a quiet place. This seemed perfect. Oh, it's quiet all right, Linda piped up, then shrunk back. And what is it you do, dear? Martha asked, the deer coming out sharper than she intended. I'm in cybersecurity, Amina said smoothly. It was the kind of job title that explained nothing and everything. Fascinating, Martha said, not meaning it. You must work from home with all your visitors. Amina's expression didn't change, but something shifted in the air. It was as if she had heard the real question underneath Martha's words. I have a lot of colleagues. We collaborate. Another dead end. Martha felt her friendly facade cracking. She handed over the HOA bylaws. You'll want to review these. We take the character of the neighborhood very seriously here. We look out for each other. Amina glanced at the papers, then back at the three women. I'm sure you do. Thank you for these. She made a small movement, a subtle shift of her weight. It was a signal the visit was over. I appreciate you stopping by. And with that, she gave a final small smile and gently closed the door. They were left standing on the pristine porch dot back at her bay window. Martha seethed. The audacity, the secrecy, the sheer lack of gratitude. That woman was hiding something. She was sure of it. Her house was a blank, silent fortress in the middle of their open, friendly street. That evening, as dusk painted the sky purple, Martha saw another car, a dark blue sedan she didn't recognize, pull into Amina's driveway. A man in a raincoat got out, was admitted quickly, and the door shut again. No light spilled out from behind the blinds. Martha's heart hammered against her ribs. This was it. This was the pattern of it. It was happening right under their noses. She thought of the children on the street, of property values, of the memory of her husband, who had worked so hard for this life. Someone had to protect it. The police. They would do a wellness check. That was the responsible thing. It wasn't racist, she told herself firmly. It was about safety. It was about rules. Anyone, of any color, acting this furtively would warrant a second look. Her hand was steady as she picked up the phone. She dialed the non-emergency line. When the dispatcher answered, Martha's voice was the perfect blend of concern and civic duty. Hello, yes. I'd like to report some suspicious activity on Elm Crest Drive, she began, her eyes fixed on the dark house at the end of the street. I'm very worried about my new neighbor. The phone felt warm and solid in Martha's hand, a tool of righteous action. She painted a careful picture for the dispatcher, her words chosen to sound reasonable, not frantic. It's the new neighbor in 221, she said, keeping her voice low, though she was alone. There's a constant stream of people at all hours. Different cars, sometimes very late. They go in, they come out, there's no socializing. The woman who lives there, she's very closed off. We tried to welcome her, and she wouldn't even let us in. Martha paused for effect. I'm a retired woman living alone. I worry. It feels like the kind of activity you hear about. Maybe it's nothing, but with the children on the street, I'd never forgive myself if it was something and I said nothing. She hung up with a sense of grim satisfaction. The wheels were in motion. The system would work. They would knock on that door, ask their questions, and the truth would come out. Amina would be flustered, exposed. The police would see right through whatever story she'd cooked up. About 40 minutes later, a patrol car, sleek and black and white, turned onto Elm Crest Drive. Martha's breath caught. It was really happening. She watched from the edge of her curtain as the car rolled slowly past the manicured lawns and came to a stop in front of Amina's house. Two officers got out, a tall man with a serious face and a shorter woman with her dark hair in a neat bun. They adjusted their belts, looked at the house, and walked up the path. Martha waited for the drama, for the door to be answered with surprise or irritation, for raised voices. But none of that happened. The door opened. Amina stood there, calm as ever. She spoke to the officers. Martha saw her nod, and then, to Martha's shock, she stepped back and invited them inside. They just walked right in. A cold trickle of doubt started in Martha's stomach. Why would they go inside? Unless she was convincing, or unless they were being polite to a fault. Minutes ticked by. 5, 10. Martha's anticipation curdled into anxiety. What were they doing in there? Having tea? Finally, after 15 long minutes, the door opened again. The officers walked out. Their body language was different now. The man was nodding, almost deferentially. The woman officer offered a small, professional smile. Amina stood in the doorway, gave a single nod, and closed the door. The officers didn't look around the neighborhood. They didn't seem concerned at all. They just got back in their car and drove away, turning left at the end of the street, disappearing as if they'd never been there. Martha stood frozen by the window. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. They were supposed to come back out, look around with sharp eyes, maybe even come to her door for a follow-up. This quiet departure felt like a defeat. The phone rang an hour later, making her jump. It was Officer Cho, the female officer, her voice calm and official. Ms. Greenwell, this is regarding your call about 221 Elmcrest. We conducted a wellness check and spoke with the resident. Everything is in order there. There's no cause for concern. But the visitors? Martha blurted out, her careful composure gone. The strange hours? The resident's professional work involves confidential consultations, Officer Cho said, her tone leaving no room for argument. It's all legitimate. We're considering the matter resolved. We appreciate your call, but no further action is needed. The click of the hang-up was the loudest sound Martha had ever heard. Legitimate? Confidential consultations? In a house like that? It was a brush off. A polite dismissal. She felt a hot wave of humiliation wash over her. That woman had talked her way out of it. She'd fooled them. The police, who were supposed to protect, had been charmed or lied to. That night, Martha couldn't sleep. The quiet of the street, usually a comfort, felt like a mockery. She replayed the scene in her head. Amina's calm face. The officers walking in. The easy way they left. It gnawed at her. A new, darker thought took root. What if the police were just lazy? What if they didn't want to do the paperwork for a real investigation in a nice neighborhood where nothing ever happened? The next morning, she decided the official channels had failed. She needed to take the story to the court of public opinion, or at least the court of Elmcrest Drive. She logged on to the neighborhood's private Facebook group, Elmcrest Eyes and Ears. It was mostly used for lost cat announcements and complaints about the garbage. Collection schedule. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard. She couldn't sound unhinged. She had to sound like a leader, a protector. She typed Esther-esque note to everyone on our lovely street. While we all value our privacy, we also value our security. It's come to my attention that there may be activities at 221 Elmcrest that don't align with the peaceful character of our community. I've already done my due diligence and contacted the proper authorities. But sometimes it takes a community's eyes to truly see. Let's all be extra vigilant. If you see something that doesn't feel right, say something. We look out for each other here. Asterisk, she posted it and sat back. The reactions were slow at first, then trickled in. Barbara wrote, Asterisk, oh so true, Martha. Better safe than sorry. Asterisk Linda added a worried face emoji. A man named Doug, who lived 3 doors down from Amina, posted, Asterisk, what kind of activities? I haven't noticed anything. Martha responded carefully. Just an unusual number of professional-looking visitors at odd hours. Doug, it may be nothing, but it pays to be aware. Asterisk then? A new comment from a younger mother, Kelly, who lived across the street from Martha. Asterisk, he saw the police car yesterday. Is everything okay? Should we be worried for our kids? Asterisk, a thrill went through Martha. This was it. The seed was planted. People were talking. They were questioning. She wasn't crazy. She was just the first one brave enough to say it. The police did a wellness check, Martha replied. Asterisk, they said everything was fine. But you know, sometimes they only see what's on the surface. We're the ones who live here every day. Asterisk, the thread grew, buzzing with low-level anxiety. Martha felt a sense of power return. She was not being ignored. She was mobilizing the troops. From her window, she saw Kelly outside, watching her children play in the front yard, her gaze now frequently drifting down toward the house at the cul-de-sac. Doug was taking his garbage out, his eyes also sliding toward 221.AMI, and a single quotes S house, however, remained silent. The blinds were down. The gray sedan was gone. It was a fortress, ignoring the whispers growing around it. To Martha, that silence was the loudest confession of all. An innocent person, she reasoned, would have come out, would have tried to explain, to fit in. This quiet defiance confirmed everything. She opened a small, elegant notebook she used for her garden plans. On a fresh page, she wrote the date in a new heading, 221 Elm Crest Log. She noted the time the gray sedan left. She would document everything. The visitors, the times, the descriptions of cars. She would build a case so solid that the next time she called, the police would have to listen. They wouldn't be able to just walk in and accept a cup of tea and a smooth lie. She was no longer just a concerned neighbor. She was a detective on a case. And as she watched the silent, secretive house, she was more convinced than ever that the case was a dangerous one. The battle for Elm Crest Drive had begun, and Martha Greenwell was not about to surrender her street without a fight. Martha's notebook became her new Bible. It sat on the kitchen table, a stark white rectangle of purpose. The garden planning pages in the back felt like a relic from a simpler, duller time. Every movement at 221 was now a data point. The first entry was simple. Asterisk 10:14 a.m. Gray sedan departs. West on Elm. Asterisk, she felt a scientist's cool detachment as she wrote. This wasn't snooping. It was surveillance. A civic duty. The Facebook post had worked, but not exactly as she'd hoped. The neighborhood buzzed for a day or two, then settled into an uneasy quiet. People glanced at the house, but life went on. Doug even waved at Amina once when they were both getting their mail, which Martha saw as a betrayal of the highest order. The police had given the place their bland stamp of approval, and most people were happy to accept that. But Martha's conviction only hardened. The lack of community outrage proved how sneaky the operation was. It was designed to blend, to deflect. Well, she wouldn't be deflected. Her entries grew more detailed. Asterisk 2:30 p.m. Delivery. Van A. locksmith. 18-minute stay. No visible locksmith tools carried in. Driver carried small black case. Suspicious? Asterisk, asterisk, 9:47 p.m. Dark SUV. Government plates. Arrives. Male, late 50s, overcoat. Departs 10:22 p.m. No lights visible in front room during visit. Asterisk. The government plates observation sent a fresh thrill through her. She looked up the format online. It matched. Was it a corrupt official? This was bigger than she thought. The breaking point came on a cool Thursday afternoon. Martha was in her backyard, pruning her rose bushes, when she heard a faint metallic scraping from the direction of Amina's house. She put her shears down and moved quietly to the fence line, peering through a gap in the wooden slats. Amina was on her roof. Not the steep, shingled part, but on the flat section over the garage. She was dressed in dark, practical clothing, and she was adjusting a small, dish-shaped object mounted on a short pole. She turned it carefully, peering at the horizon, then tightened the bolt. To Martha, it was a revelation. A satellite dish, but not the big kind for television. This was smaller, sleek, technical. It looked exactly like the kind of thing you saw in movies when people were listening in on someone, or tracking them. Her heart hammered against her ribs. This was no longer about suspicious visitors. This was equipment. Espionage equipment. Right here in Elmcrest. She stumbled back into her house, her hands trembling, but now with a kind of furious energy. This was it. The proof. She went straight to the phone. This time, she didn't call the non-emergency line. This time, she dialed 911. What is your emergency? The operator's voice was calm, professional. I need to report a person with a weapon, Martha said, the lie coming out in a rushed whisper. My neighbor. She's on her roof. I saw it from my yard. It looked like a rifle, or part of one. She's adjusting it. I'm very frightened. She gave the address, her voice shaking with believable terror. This got action. Within minutes, 2 patrol cars, sirens off but lights flashing a silent, urgent blue and red, pulled up. 4 officers got out. This was different. This was a response. Martha watched, hidden behind her curtain, a knot of triumph and fear in her stomach. Let's see you talk your way out of this, she thought. The officers approached with more caution this time. Their hands weren't on their guns, but they were alert, postures ready. They called up to the roof. Amina appeared at the edge, looked down, and showed her empty hands. She said something they couldn't hear. Then she pointed to the side of the house and climbed down a ladder. The officers met her on the ground. There was a conversation. Martha saw Amina gesture toward the roof, then toward her house. The lead officer, a sergeant with a stern, weathered face, listened, his arms crossed. He looked up at the dish, then back at Amina. Then he did something that made Martha's blood run cold. He nodded. Not a polite nod, but a nod of understanding. Then he followed Amina into the house, leaving the other 3 officers outside. No, Martha whispered to the empty room. No, no, no. The sergeant was inside for even longer than the first officers had been. When he came out, his expression was unreadable. He said a few words to his team, and they all relaxed. They got back in their cars. But instead of leaving, the sergeant's car pulled away from the curb and drove the short distance to Martha's house. He was coming to her. For a wild second, she thought he was coming to thank her, to apologize for not listening before. She smoothed her blouse and opened the door before he could ring the bell. Miss Greenwell? I'm Sergeant Lewis. We spoke on the phone about the concern at 221. Yes, Sergeant. Come in, please. Did you see it? The device? She asked, her voice eager. He stayed on the porch. Ma'am, I did. I also spoke at length with your neighbor. I've seen her credentials and been briefed on her work. Credentials? Briefed? The words felt alien. Her work involves sensitive communications technology. The sergeant continued, his voice low and firm. That device is authorized and part of a lawful federal operation. What you did, ma'am, was extremely dangerous. Martha's face flushed hot. Dangerous? I was reporting a threat. You reported a woman with a weapon, the sergeant said, his eyes holding hers. That is a very specific allegation. We responded under a potential active threat protocol. That puts my officers at risk. It puts your neighbor at risk. And it jeopardizes a very important investigation. But the visitors, the secrecy. Martha sputtered, her certainty crumbling under his steady gaze. Are none of your business. He finished, not unkindly, but with a finality that felt like a door slamming. I am instructing you, officially, to cease and desist from making any further reports about 221 Elmcrest, unless you have direct, immediate evidence of a violent crime in progress. What you're doing borders on harassment, and it could be considered filing false reports. Do you understand? The word harassment hit her like a slap. She, Martha Greenwell, a pillar of the community, being accused of harassment. She could only nod, humiliated. Good day, ma'am, the sergeant said. He turned and walked back to his car. Martha closed the door softly and leaned against it, the cool wood against her back. The victory she'd felt was ashes. They had scolded her. They had taken her side. A wave of raw, white-hot anger washed over the humiliation. Credentials? A federal operation? It was a story. A cover story they'd all agreed to tell. The police were either fools or they were in on it. She walked to the window. The street was quiet again. The police were gone. Amina's house was a silent monument to her defeat. But as she stared, the anger began to cool and harden into something else, a deep, cold resolve. The police wouldn't help. The neighborhood was blind. So it was up to her. If they wanted to play this game with official stories and credentials, she would find the proof that no one could ignore. She would expose the truth herself. She went to the kitchen table and opened her notebook. She drew a line under her last entry. Then, on a fresh page, she wrote a new title, her handwriting tight and controlled. Operation Sunlight. They thought they could silence her with official words. They thought she was just a nosy old woman. They had no idea who they were dealing with. She would shine a light so bright on that house that nothing could hide in its shadows. She just needed to get closer. She needed to see what was really happening inside. Operation Sunlight began not with a bang, but with a trip to the library. Martha sat at a public computer, her fingers clumsy on the keyboard. She looked up things like private investigation techniques and right to privacy laws. Most of it was confusing, but one piece of advice stuck. Document everything. Well, she was already doing that. The problem was her angle. Her view from the house was limited. She needed to get closer. The idea came to her while she was taking out her recycling. She saw Amina's gray sedan pull out of the driveway and turn left, away from the neighborhood. The house was empty. A plan, risky and thrilling, took shape in her mind. She wouldn't do anything illegal, of course. She would just observe, from a different vantage point. She put on her gardening hat and a light jacket and tucked her small digital camera into the pocket. She told herself she was just going for a walk to check on the peonies in the common area garden near the cul-de-sac dot. Her heart thumped against her ribs as she walked down the sidewalk. The street was quiet mid-morning. She passed Doug's house, then Linda's. She nodded to a neighbor walking a dog, forcing a smile. Every step towards the silent house felt louder than the last. The common area garden was a small, sad patch of mulch and hardy shrubs right at the curve of the cul-de-sac, directly across from Amina's property. It offered a perfect, unobstructed view of the front door, and the side of the house where the garage was. Martha pretended to examine a shrub, her back to the street. Then, casually, she turned. She raised her camera, not to her eye, but held it low, at her waist. She clicked a picture of a flower, then panned slightly. Click, the front of Amina's house. Click, the garage. She felt like a spy in a cheap novel, but the adrenaline was real. She was about to turn back when movement at the side of the house caught her eye. A side window, one that was usually covered by a blind, had a gap of about an inch at the bottom. The blind hadn't been pulled all the way down. Without thinking, her feet carried her off the garden path and onto the grass. She told herself she was just getting a different angle on the peonies. She edged closer to the property line. From here, if she squinted, she could see into the sliver of the window dot. It wasn't a living room or a bedroom. It was an office, but unlike any office she'd ever seen. The wall was a giant map, covered with lines and colored pins. Several large computer monitors glowed with what looked like video, feeds grainy black and white images of streets and buildings she didn't recognize. Wires snaked across a large table, connecting to boxes with blinking green and red lights. Martha's breath caught. This was it. This was the proof. It looked like a movie. It looked like a... Her foot caught on a loose sprinkler head hidden in the grass. She stumbled forward with a small gasp, her arms pinwheeling. To stop her fall, she threw a hand out against the side of Amina's house, right below the window. The sound was loud in the quiet morning. She froze, hunched over, her palms stinging. Her heart was a wild bird in her chest. Slowly, she straightened up and looked directly into the room. Amina was standing there. She wasn't at the desk. She was just inside the window, perfectly still, holding a glass of water. She must have walked in moments before. Her eyes weren't on the monitors or the map. They were locked on Martha's face through the gap in the blind. There was no surprise in her expression. No anger, just a deep, icy calm. It was the look of a scientist observing an unexpected but predictable insect. She didn't move. She didn't speak. She simply watched. Martha felt the world shrink to that 1-inch gap and the dark, knowing eyes on the other side. All her theories, her notes, her righteous anger evaporated under that gaze. This wasn't a puzzle to be solved anymore. It was a line she had crossed, and the person on the other side was not a criminal she was exposing. She was something else entirely. Something official. Something Martha had just gotten caught by. Amina took a slow, deliberate sip of water, her eyes never leaving Martha's. Then, with her free hand, she reached over and gently pulled the cord. The blind dropped with a soft, final thwump, closing off the view. Martha stumbled backward, off the grass and onto the sidewalk. She turned and walked, then half ran, back toward her house, her gardening hat forgotten. She didn't look back. The feeling of those eyes on her was like a physical weight on her shoulders. She spent the rest of the day in a cold sweat. Every sound made her jump. She expected a police car, a knock on the door, something, but nothing happened. The silence was worse. It felt like waiting for the other shoe to drop. The shoe dropped the next morning. It wasn't a police officer. It was a man in a dark suit, crisp white shirt, no tie. He had a short, professional haircut and carried a simple leather folder. He looked like he'd stepped out of a boardroom or a government building. He rang the bell once, a clean, authoritative sound. Martha opened the door, her throat tight. "Miss Greenwell? My name is Carter. I'm with the Federal Bureau of Investigation. May I come in?" The words landed like stones. Federal Bureau of Investigation. So it was true. All of it? She nodded, unable to speak, and led him to the living room. He didn't sit. He stood in the center of the room, making it feel small, I'll be direct. Ma'am, he began, his voice devoid of warmth, but not hostile. It was the voice of pure fact. You have been engaging in persistent surveillance and harassment of one of our agents. You have filed misleading police reports. You have trespassed on her property. And yesterday, you attempted to photograph a secure federal operations post. I was just concerned for the neighborhood, Martha whispered, her own voice sounding pathetic. Your concerns have compromised an active counterintelligence operation, he said, cutting through her excuse like a knife. That map you saw? Those feeds? Your actions, your notes, your little Facebook campaign have forced us to assume our surveillance may have been detected by a very dangerous subject. The safety of agents and the success of a years-long investigation have been put at risk because you decided to play detective. Martha felt the floor tilt under her. Counterintelligence. Dangerous. Subject. Years long. The words painted a picture so vast and terrifying. It made her earlier suspicions about drugs or petty crime seem childish. I didn't know, she said. But the words were hollow. That's the point, Miss Greenwell, Carter said. You didn't know. And you didn't care to stop when the police, twice, told you to cease. You escalated. He opened his leather folder. We are now at a crossroads. I can have you arrested today for obstruction of justice, trespassing, and filing false statements to law enforcement. You would be charged as a federal defendant. Tears of pure terror blurred Martha's vision. A federal defendant. Prison. The shame. Or, he continued, snapping the folder shut, you can choose option 2. You will sign a non-disclosure agreement. You will cease all monitoring, all discussion of your neighbor and her home. You will delete your notes and any photographs. You will recant your statements on your neighborhood forum in a way that does not raise further suspicion. You will, effectively, become a silent partner in this operation until we conclude it. In return, we will not prosecute. He laid the choice out like a menu. Ruin or silence. What? What do I have to say? She asked, her voice trembling. You will post that. Upon personal reflection and a neighborly conversation, you misunderstood the situation. That your new neighbor is a lovely woman working on a confidential government project, and out of respect for her service, you will be making no further comments. Then you will stop, forever. Martha looked at him, this man from a world she only saw on the news. She looked at her perfect living room, at the portrait of her husband on the mantel. She thought of the quiet, orderly life she had built and defended so fiercely. It was all about to shatter. There was no choice. I'll take option 2, she said, the words tasting like ash. He nodded, a single businesslike dip of his head. A wise decision. The agreement will be delivered this afternoon. Read it carefully. Comply with every word. Your neighbor, Special Agent Johnson, will be monitoring the situation closely. He turned and left, leaving the smell of cold air and authority behind. Martha sank into her wingback chair, the same one she'd watched the street from for so long, the street she thought she owned. She looked out the bay window. The house at 221 Elm Crest sat there, quiet and still. It wasn't a mystery anymore. It was a fortress, and she had just surrendered to it unconditionally. The war was over, and she had lost everything without a single shot being fired, except the one from her own camera. A camera whose memory card she now had to find and destroy. The document arrived in a plain envelope, left in her mailbox by someone she never saw. The non-disclosure agreement was 10 pages of dense, small print. Words like espionage, national security, and felony prosecution jumped out at her. Martha signed it with a hand that barely trembled, a strange numbness having settled over her. The fear was still there, but it was buried under a heavy blanket of shock. Her first task was the Facebook post. She typed it out, deleted it, typed it again. It had to sound like her, but also not like her. The final version made her skin crawl with its false warmth. Asterisk an update for our wonderful neighbors. I had the chance to have a lovely chat with our new resident at 221 Elm Crest. I'm embarrassed to say I let my concern run away with me. She is a dedicated professional working on a highly confidential government project, and her discretion is a sign of her commitment, not anything suspicious. Out of respect for her important work, I will not be commenting further on the matter. Let's all extend to her the quiet and privacy she deserves. Asterisk, she hit post and immediately closed her laptop, as if it were something that could burn her. The comments started almost instantly. Barbara wrote, Asterisk, Martha? I knew it would be something like that. Doug posted a thumbs up emoji. The tone was one of relief. The neighborhood was happy to have a simple, noble explanation. They moved on within hours. Martha, however, was trapped. She took her notebook Operation Sunlight and the little digital camera into the garage. She tore each page from the notebook, methodically shredding it by hand into a small plastic bag. She found the camera's memory card, a tiny sliver of plastic that held her humiliation, and snapped it in half with a pair of pliers. She mixed the fragments with coffee grounds and eggshells before throwing them away. Then she tried to return to her life. But her life had changed. The bay window, her command post, now felt like a prison wall. She couldn't look at the house at the end of the street. She found herself arranging her chairs to face away from it. The rhythm of Elm Crest Drive continued the trash trucks, the paperboy, the sprinklers, but she was no longer its conductor. She was an extra in the scene, careful not to step out of line. Amina, or rather, Special Agent Johnson, became a ghost in the neighborhood. Her comings and goings continued, but Martha made sure she was never at the window to see them. Once, at the mailbox, they arrived at the same time. Martha froze, her heart in her throat. Amina simply nodded, the same calm, unreadable nod she'd given the police officers months before, and went back inside. There was no gloating, no anger. There was nothing at all. The indifference was the most complete defeat. Weeks passed. The seasons began to turn. And then, one night, the rhythm broke again. It was well past midnight when Martha, unable to sleep, heard the low rumble of vehicles. Not cars, trucks. She risked a glance through the edge of the blinds. On the street, it looked like a small, silent movie was playing under the yellow glow of the streetlights. Two large, unmarked moving vans were backed into Amina's driveway. Men and women in dark jackets moved with swift, efficient purpose, carrying boxes and equipment out of the house and loading them into the vans. There were no voices, just the soft thumps and scrapes of a rapid evacuation. Within an hour, the vans were sealed. They drove off, their red taillights disappearing into the darkness. The following morning, 221 Elm Crest stood empty again. The blinds were gone from the windows, revealing bare rooms. The satellite dish was off the roof. By afternoon, a realtor's sign was staked into the perfect lawn. The operation, whatever it had been, was over. The fortress was being decommissioned. A strange hollow feeling opened up inside Martha. It was over. The threat, the mystery, the war all gone. And with it, her purpose. She had spent months obsessed with that house, with that woman. Now there was just a house for sale. A few days later, as Martha was walking back from collecting her mail, she saw a figure standing on the sidewalk in front of 221. It was Amina. She was alone. Looking at the empty building, a single car parked at the curb. Martha's first instinct was to flee, to turn around and walk the other way. But her feet felt rooted to the spot. Amina turned and saw her. This time, She didn't nod and leave. She just stood, waiting. Swallowing a lump of dry fear, Martha walked forward. She stopped a polite, careful distance away. The two women stood in silence for a moment. The empty house between them. "You're leaving," Martha finally said. Because it was the only safe thing she could think of. "The assignment is complete," Amina replied. Her voice was the same, calm, clear. Martha looked at the house, then down at her own hands. "The agent, Carter. He said I might have ruined it, that I alerted someone." Amina considered this. "You created a complication. We had to adjust." The subject was apprehended early this morning at a different location. The operation was ultimately successful. Martha didn't know what to say to that. Congratulations felt grotesque. "I'm sorry" felt insufficient and selfish. "Why did you do it?" Amina asked suddenly. The question wasn't angry. It was curious, almost clinical. "The first time the police came, you were told it was fine. Why not stop then?" Martha stared at the manicured grass of the lawn she'd once resented. The real answer was a tangled mess of fear, pride, and things she'd spent a lifetime never examining. "I thought I was protecting something," she said, the words sounding weak even to her. "My street, my way of life. I thought you were a threat to that." Amina nodded slowly, as if a hypothesis had been confirmed. "You were so sure you knew what the threat was, you became one." She didn't say it as an insult. It was a simple statement of fact, and it cut deeper than any accusation. Tears, hot and sudden, welled in Martha's eyes. She blinked them back furiously. "What was it? The operation?" "I can't tell you that," Amina said. "But it was real. The man we were watching was responsible for a great deal of harm. Your neighborhood was just a quiet place with a good sight line. It was never about you or Elmcrest. It was a tool to stop a bad person." Martha absorbed this. Her perfect street, just a tool. Her war, a pointless sideshow in something real. The humiliation was complete, but beneath it, for the first time, was a glimmer of understanding so vast it was dizzying. Amina turned to go, then paused. She looked at Martha, really looked at her, not as a problem to be managed, but as a person. "The neighborhood is all yours again, Miss Greenwell." She gestured with her chin toward the silent houses, the trimmed hedges, the empty porch where Martha used to sit. "I'd recommend using your vigilance on something that actually matters." She got into her car, started the engine, and drove away. She didn't look back. Martha stood on the sidewalk for a long time. She looked at the for sale sign. She looked at her own house. She looked up and down the quiet, peaceful, empty street. Slowly, she walked home. She didn't go to the bay window. Instead, she went to the phone. She called the local community center. She'd seen a flyer once about a volunteer program that helped new families, refugees, settle into the city. They often needed help navigating things, finding their way. She'd always been too busy. When the woman on the phone asked how she could help, Martha took a breath. "I'd like to volunteer," she said. "I'm good with details, and I have time." She hung up and finally looked out the window. The house at 221 was just a house. The street was just a street. The world was so much bigger and more complicated than she had ever allowed herself to see. And for the first time in a long time, that thought didn't fill her with fear. It just was. And maybe, just maybe, there was a place for her in it that wasn't behind a curtain, watching.